Hey everybody, welcome to this webinar. I'm Lisa. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So this event is going to last about an hour. I will talk for about 40 or 45 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for a bit of a Q&A. I can't see or hear you all, unfortunately, but I can read the chat. I probably won't be reading that while I'm presenting, but you can have a look at the end, and obviously feel free to chat to each other, and then drop questions into the Q&A. So at the end of the talk, I'll then pick out those questions for the Q&A, and we'll go through those as well. So if anything kind of comes up during that you want a bit more clarity on, or any thoughts you have, feel free to drop them in there. So yeah, let's get started. So hi, first a quick intro. I'm Lisa Carling-Curtis. I'm one of the founding engineers here at Incident.io. So we're an incident management platform, as I think probably most of you know. And if you're interested, we'd obviously love to chat after this. So I've spent the last few years working on various things, but including our catalog. And through that time, I've talked to a lot of customers about their experiences building and maintaining their own catalogs. And that's kind of where this talk originally came from. So catalogs promise a lot of things. At my previous role, we'd implemented a service catalog and it hadn't been a great experience. We'd spent a huge amount of effort on it and ended up with something that was okay, but it didn't really deliver nearly enough value to justify the huge effort that we'd put in. Pretty much everyone agrees that service catalogs are useful. So when we started talking to customers, I was waiting to find out not just all the amazing things that they'd done, but finally understand how we'd got it so wrong. And don't get me wrong, I did hear some amazing stories about really cool things that people are now doing with their catalogs. But I also heard the same things over and over again, which started to feel hauntingly familiar. It took us forever to build. It's not quite ready, but it's nearly there. I'm not even sure if the data's even right anymore. And almost everyone said, we'd love to see more people using it. And so I started to wonder, maybe my experience in my last role wasn't so unique after all, and maybe there is a better way. So today we're going to walk through, first off, why would you build a catalog at all? Then what makes it so difficult? And then how can we build one a little bit better? So why build a catalog? At Incident, we talk about the catalog as a connected map of everything in your organization. When we were launching ours, we joked about the tagline, connecting everything everywhere all at once. We didn't because we didn't want to get sued, but I stand by it as an explanation of what a great catalog is for. And really, it's a database. It might store your services, teams, infra information, but ultimately it's a list of things and connections between those things, like a database or a graph. You can use a catalog to decide which team to page when something goes wrong. And you can use it to give you a bird's eye view of a service, maybe with useful links like recent pull requests, incident monitoring dashboards, and monitoring dashboards into a single user interface. Or it can help avoid the pre-audit scramble. Collecting data as you go throughout the year can make your annual audits much less painful. Understanding whether you've implemented the latest security standards or whether you've gone through a particular set of checks. So that all sounds great. What makes building a catalog so difficult? To explain this, I'm going to tell a story. And this is really a combination of a number of stories that I've been told about what implementing a catalog feels like and how it can go quite wrong. The story starts with lofty ambitions and big ideas. You've gone to a tech conference and listened to someone like me yap on about how great a service catalog is. You go back and you talk to engineering managers and tech leads from across the org, making a list of their pain points which you think a catalog might solve. You put together a business case, and it becomes the next big ticket item on your roadmap. How long will it take? I don't know, a couple of months. You start with a classic build versus buy decision, writing out a list of use cases and weighing up the pros and cons of various tools. You share a document for other engineers to read, but you don't get much traction. After a few opinions from a couple of key managers, Eventually, you decide on using a paid tool so you can set up nice and fast. We can't talk forever. Let's start building. So you open your laptop on day one and you go, hey, do we have a list of services? And you go and talk to some tech leads from other teams and pretty quickly conclude that, no, we do not have a list of services. And you start making a list. You write a list of all the services your team owns, well, the ones you can remember. You realize that you can pull a list of pods from your various Kubernetes clusters, maybe work backwards from there. The names of the pods are not as helpful as you'd hoped. Ultimately, you realize that you're undertaking a huge information gathering exercise from across the organization. It's week 4. You go to your monthly tech lead meeting and present the plan for building out your service catalog. You ask each of them to take a look at the list of Kubernetes pods, map them to a service in a big spreadsheet, answer a couple of questions about them, and then add anything that might be missing. Sounds pretty simple, right? So it's week 5, and you've had responses from some of your tech leads, but you've also discovered that this just isn't a priority for many of them. They've got incidents to handle, shipping deadlines to meet, angry customers breathing down their neck. This isn't something that they're going to be assessed on or held accountable for. They aren't crying out for a catalog. Many aren't really sure what value it will provide to them when it's done. And you don't have the authority or the social capital to change their mind. And so you end up spending your days chasing the busiest people in your engineering org. And in the process, you find that you're burning all of your social capital because you are annoying. As you're chasing the rest of the org, people begin to meaningfully engage with what you're building and why and how, often for the first time. It turns out it's not until you ask people to actually do something that they start really wanting to understand why they're doing it. By now, you're spending most of your energy persuading people that this is a worthwhile thing for them to contribute to, and that you've chosen the right tools, the right approach, and so on. You're probably also having some really fun arguments about what you've called everything. You also probably find that you made some genuinely bad assumptions in your initial scoping. Now people are really engaging. You start to see what the most valuable information you could gather actually is. You realize that to get buy-in, you need to change your approach. Ask for some different information, maybe ask people to provide it in a different way. Everyone loves a good YAML versus JSON argument, after all. And you know this is for the best. You'll get a better outcome by being consultative and listening to feedback. But at the time, it doesn't feel great. It's week 8, and you now find yourself going back to all those tech leads that you'd already spoken to and doing a second pass, maybe even a third, asking for more information, and then going back into the never-ending cycle of chasing. It's week 9, and you're still chasing. And chasing. You start escalating to managers to get engagement from the last few holdouts, and you do get what you need from them, but at a cost. Their first experience with the catalog project is an actively hostile interaction, where they're being forced to spend time away from their top priorities. At this point, you've pretty much used all your social capital that you had, and then some on top. You are in social capital debt. And you have a major security incident. It's a near miss, luckily, but word comes down correctly that there's a new P1 project that your team needs to pick up. We'll have to pause on the catalog work. It can wait while we shore up our infrastructure. See you in a couple of months. And we're back. You go to a company meeting where someone's talking about the MVP of a new fraud detection service that they've just released. And you realize that that isn't represented in your catalog at all. That team hasn't kept their catalog up to date. How many other things have changed since you started gathering the data? You decide that it doesn't matter. You need to launch this thing so that you can both start building features that use the catalog and get out of what feels like a never-ending death spiral of data collection. So you turn up one bright Monday morning and announce in Slack that we have launched the catalog. And you look around and no one else seems to really care all that much. You run a demo with the whole of engineering and everyone nods and says, "Oh, that's neat." And you tap yourselves on the back for a job well done. But then everybody goes back to their day-to-day as if nothing's really happened. Because for them, nothing has. Over the next 6 months, your team continues to try and find different things to build using the catalog. You run an internal survey, asking engineering how often they use the catalog, what they find most useful. What features would they like to see over the next 6 months? And the response is underwhelming. Some of the data's not quite right. The service dependency graph is kind of cool. I don't really use it much, to be honest. And when you reflect as a team, you also conclude that we'd love to see more people using it. So, what's gone wrong? We've ended up with 3 big problems. We don't really remember why we built it. We don't, and maybe never did, have buy-in from the wider org, and the data isn't staying up to date. So let's break that down and see what we can learn. We had unclear objectives at the start. Remember that laundry list that the catalog was going to do? It was going to solve all our problems. But having so many different objectives makes it really difficult to deliver value on any of them. Your focus is constantly split, trying to make a catalog that can be all things to all people. It's an easy mistake to make. When you wrote your business case to build a catalog, perhaps no one of these problems would justify such a large piece of work. When you combine them together, it becomes a no-brainer. But when we start building a catalog, we seem to forget everything that we know and we use in our day-to-day about how to build products. To build a good product, you have to be focused on the problem, not the solution. But with a catalog, the problem is so multifaceted that instead, all our focus goes on the solution. How are we going to get all the data that we don't currently have? What tool are we going to put it in? How are we going to store it? Back on our JSON versus YAML argument. And just like building any other product, you want to deliver value incrementally, focusing on the first minimum valuable product that you can ship. What's the first thing that would add value? How fast can I get there? And then we do that again and again and again. And maybe the first thing you build might not be a catalog at all. Maybe it's just reorganizing your infrastructure repo so that all the configuration relating to one service can live in a single file. Or creating a Notion database where you can put all your runbooks. Those projects aren't failures. They're useful steps towards building out a catalog that is genuinely valuable for your team, always looking for the next valuable increment. So on to problem 2. We just didn't have enough buy-in from the org. You'll remember in our story, we spent a lot of time chasing people from around the organization. And that process used up all our social capital and left key people around the org feeling bored, grumpy, confused, and irritated. We were asking people to take time out of their busy schedules to do something fundamentally boring, write lists of things they own, and fill in forms about them. And remember, we didn't deliver any value back to those people for nearly 5 months. Once again, focusing on incremental value will help us here. And it's much easier to get buy-in for a smaller piece of work with a clear goal when you're delivering value back to your stakeholders quickly and iteratively. The other trap that we fell into was to prioritize breadth over depth. When you're making a list and checking it twice, it's really easy to become fixated on finishing the list. We're engineers, we like finishing things, we like things being complete, and finishing the list is really satisfying. It feels so good to have everything written down. But in doing so, we fall foul of the 80-20 rule. Gathering that long tail of data is incredibly time-consuming. Chasing after the service that no one remembers why it's there or whether it even runs, that someone built 15 years ago in a hackathon. That uses all of our social capital, and it's often just not that valuable. Instead of trying to provide a thin layer of value to the whole org, we can instead focus on a single team. That again makes our first project much more achievable. We don't have to do something for all 300 services that we run, or 3,000. We can just make it feel really good for the 15 services that this one team has ownership of. We can choose a team that has a bit more space in their roadmap. Maybe a team that we've worked with before and already have a good pre-built relationship and plenty of social capital. Because there's just one team, we can iterate really quickly on their feedback and make them feel part of the process, delivering incremental value as we go. And once we've got something that feels good, it's much easier to get buy-in from the rest of the org. You can show them exactly what they'll get if they take the time to gather the data. And you can continue to deliver value despite the handful of teams that just don't want or don't have time to engage with you right now. Teams start wanting you rather than you needing them. And so we come to our final problem. The data is rotting. We found ourselves trapped in a negative cycle. The catalog data isn't quite right. I don't trust it, so I'm not going to build on it. The catalog doesn't do anything for me. It's not worth me updating my data in the catalog. When building a catalog, you must always remember that any data that isn't being used will rot. Engineering organizations change really quickly, and so the data becomes stale. And once stale, it's not just unhelpful, it's actively harmful. If the data isn't accurate, our negative cycle is almost inevitable. Once people lose trust in the data, you're going to have to work twice as hard to win it back. And the only way to keep data from going stale is to use it. And no, displaying data on a web page does not count as using it. If your catalog contains the data about which services are in which clusters, it should decide which services are deployed into which clusters. So it can't rot. If it stores a list of which teams own which services, it should decide who gets paged when there is an alert against that service. If the wrong person gets paged, I promise they will fix the catalog data very, very quickly. Well, as long as they can change the data. If someone can't change the data easily or safely, then the data is going to rot, and fast. And the last thing that you want is to become the gatekeepers of the underlying data, receiving endless requests to make small changes, which will eventually dry up as people just stop bothering. So that means everyone needs to know where the data is and have the confidence that they can safely change it. A classic example of this going wrong is having an overloaded IT or people ops team who are responsible for managing team membership, leaving the on-paper org chart to drift inevitably further and further from reality. When you get this wrong and the data becomes stale, engineers, we're a great bunch of problem solvers, and we'll find other ways to solve our problem, like adding a hacky redirect onto your paging software to redirect alerts to the right team. Yes, I've seen it happen, and yes, it was a bad idea. So let's recap our key takeaways. First off, we realized that clarity is key. With so many objectives floating around, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. But by focusing on incremental value and tackling problems one step at a time, we can deliver value to our team, increment by increment. Start small with a single team and deliver quick wins to preserve your social capital. And prioritize depth over breadth. It's better to make one team love you than have every team just about remember that you exist. Collect data which you can use, and then continue to use it so it doesn't rot. Make it really easy for everyone to update the source data to keep it fresh, and make it really obvious what changing that data is going to do. So I gave this talk at SRECon last year and had a load of really great chats afterwards. And many were worried that they were either about to embark on this same path or possibly were already there, starting months and months of chasing and data collection. And they asked me in practical terms and, off the record, what would I do in their position? And it got me thinking, what if we're actually thinking about this whole problem upside down? Because what I said was, well, I'd probably start by just building a way of routing your alerts and let the catalog appear kind of as a side effect. The catalog is not the goal. The goal is all those other things we talked about: alert routing, infrastructure automation, better onboarding experiences. And so I think the actual mistake here might have been to write a roadmap item that said catalog in the first place. What would happen if we focus on solving other problems? And the catalog is just a mechanism that we might use as and when we need it. For these projects, the value is self-evident. You're not burning any social capital convincing people that it's worthwhile to pursue some greater goal for a multi-year return on investment. And once we've done 2 or 3 of those, we can coalesce our existing data sources into a formal catalog, which is already adding value to the org, sidestepping a lot of the social capital challenges that we discussed earlier. And I was thinking that at Incident.io, without really thinking about it, this is how we built our catalog. And we were definitely operating in easy mode, a small team with a comparatively short history. I think this approach would actually scale up to bigger orgs too. We started with a list of users with tags and using those tags to determine what access they'd get to our infrastructure and our data. This lived in our infrastructure repo and was managed via Terraform. Google IAM rules and all of that good stuff. And most orgs will have something like this, although it's usually not very fine-grained. E.g., you might just have a single engineering team. And then we introduced teams so that we could create a Google group and easily invite everyone to the right rituals, stand-ups, retros, that kind of thing. This can be incremental. There's no reason that we needed all of our teams here at once. But as teams wanted to opt in, they built it out over time. And then we wanted to be able to route errors from our code base to different teams, depending on who owned the package, because we split our on-call rota into 2. And so we started tagging packages in our Go codebase and building out a mapping of Go packages to teams and using this to route our alerts using our own catalog. We wanted to build an internal status page so that our teams could understand the impact of any ongoing incidents across our product. So we wrote out a list of features and feature areas that we could assign to our incidents. We also wanted to know who owned each of them so that if somebody from our customer support team wanted to raise an incident, they could tell us what was broken, and we would then be able to route it to the right team to help fix the problem. We wanted to be able to tag incidents with customers, so we could tag the account manager in incidents that were affecting their customers. and also understand if a particular customer might be having a bit of a bad time. And we landed on a catalog that looks something like this. We've got packages, we've got features, teams, users, customers. But the interesting thing is, we never had a project called Build a Service Catalog. And we didn't draw this diagram up front. It emerged over time as we had problems that we needed to solve. Now, this might feel really uncomfortable. You want to kick off the big initiative that's going to build a whole new world and get that promotion. But in fact, I think you're far more likely to succeed if you let your catalog emerge as a side effect of the other projects that you're running to deliver value to your engineering org. Encourage your teams to take some extra time when they're solving a problem like alert routing to store the data in a way that's easily accessible to others and easy for people to change. Maybe you should also settle this whole JSON YAML rubbish once and for all and pick a standard. Get really good at identifying what a catalog-shaped problem looks like. That is basically a problem where if you had a load of data about the connections between things, you would be able to solve it in an elegant way and in a way that reduced the configuration burden for your teams. And then continue to deliver incremental value to the rest of your organization by solving one problem at a time. While you're doing that, you can then start to coalesce these various sorts of data and essentially stick a sticky label on the front that says catalog. And you can go and meet your OKR or try and chase your promotion. But ultimately, the most important thing is that you will have delivered genuine value across your org and solved the most important problems first. And you won't have spent all your social capital in the process. Thanks so much for listening. We have run a bit under time, so we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So sorry about that. But yeah, I'm going to just have a look at the Q&A tab, but feel free to drop all your questions in there now. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because there's nothing interesting on there now. And you just get my beautiful, huge face. Cool. Cool. So let's start with at the beginning. So how do you persuade teams to use the catalog once you start building? So I think that the key is you should have built something that they want. And this sounds a little bit silly, but if you have not built something that they want, they probably should not be using the catalog. There are a couple of cases where this is a bit harder. So most of our catalog use cases are for things like alert routing, and teams, they'll be grumpy about it, but they do want to get paged. Or, infrastructure as code. Actually, they probably do want to manage their infrastructure in a consistent way and get all of the automated logging or alerting maybe that you provide. I think the place where this becomes a bit more difficult is when you're trying to use some of those more like audit security kind of cases. So you want to make your next audit go really well. So you want people to input a load of information about security standards. And that, I think, is where you do have to do a bit more work. And there's kind of a carrot and stick. But ultimately, that's about that process of security and audit being something that your company buys into. And if all of your tech leads understand that that's part of their remit as a tech lead, is that they have to make sure that their part kind of isn't the problem child, then I think that you can persuade people that it's valuable even from that point of view. But I do think that that is probably more difficult. And so I would probably start elsewhere. And then you can start to kind of really dig into those security issues. I also think the security and audit side is something that is more cultural. And I think in a lot of companies, it's often something that individuals or a handful of people really care about and understand, and most people just don't really get it. And so I think often you want to make that kind of pain, which is often, people will quietly and diligently deal with that pain. I think it can be really useful to put that a bit more out in the open and try and push that a little bit more onto teams so that people understand the impact of what they're doing. But yeah, I hope that was clear. And let's do Eric's question next. So is there an analogous incident role or process for reanimating a rotted catalog? Oh, there's way more than I'd read, sorry. That aligns with the D&D subclass of necromancer. Or more broadly, is there value in spending effort to revive context and value from stale or questionable data? So I think it depends on how stale or how questionable, but most importantly, it depends on PR. So if your whole company hates this thing, you should probably kill it and build a new thing, even if quietly in the background you might be doing some copy pasting around. Because the most important thing is about trust, and killing something and creating a new thing with a new name can be a really great way of rebuilding trust. And it might be that essentially the sort of brand that has internally is just not workable for you. The other thing I'd say is, how has that data become kind of stale or questionable? And so I would always be looking for ways in which you can use that data. And if you can't use it, and there is lots of data that it would be really nice to have to be able to build really great onboarding docs. But if you only onboard somebody into each team once every year, it's very unlikely that you're going to make those onboarding docs genuinely great and maintained up to date. And so I think that there is sometimes a case of, well, if the data has gone stale because no one is using it, does that mean that actually we shouldn't be putting effort in to that data? Now, sometimes the answer to that question is absolutely no, and there are lots of other reasons why data can go stale. But I think you do want to really look at it and be sort of thoughtful about how have we got into this state and what's going to make sure that we don't get back into this state. Because if it is every year I go around with a big stick so that everybody updates the spreadsheet, and then over the course of the year it rots, and then I have to get my big stick out, that doesn't feel like it's a particularly great process, and probably there's a different way of managing it, would be my guess. But yeah, I enjoyed the question and the D&D reference greatly. Cool. Let's just keep going through these. So how do we justify focusing on a few teams only? So yeah. Sorry, Adrienne, that's the 527 one who is in the background, showing the questions to everybody. So I think that when you're a big org, there is a temptation to sort of want to deliver lots and lots of high value stuff to everybody all at the same time. And if you're not doing that, the perception can be that you are you're not really serving people. I think that the counter argument here is it won't work. And ultimately that requires trust and buy-in from the org, is, whether you send people a link to this webinar or, talk about your own experience and the own way you build products. But the kind of analogy I'd use is, if you are shipping a product, you probably do not ship it to every single one of your customers on day one. You probably use some kind of feature flag system. You do some kind of incremental rollout. You give it to a few customers, you see what they think, you iterate, and then you go and do a big bang launch. And so I think the way to justify it and talk about it internally is, this is just like building products. It just so happens that this is an internal product. But fundamentally, all of the things that we know about how we release products are the same. I think there's probably still places where that will not land, but that's about, trust, social capital, being able to kind of make that argument. But that's definitely the argument that I would choose. Cool. Eric is asking if I've been spying. So the thing that's really funny about this, as I say, this was from my experience, right? And I really thought that we'd just done something quite silly. And then I kept talking to people while kind of building out the Incident.io catalog product, and hearing these same stories over and over and over again. And I felt honestly a little bit better, because it meant that we hadn't uniquely screwed it up. But it felt really strange to me how consistent it was. And as I say, I gave this talk at SREcon, and at SREcon, I had people saying the same thing, in the comments going, oh, it's like you've been in my meeting rooms. And it is really remarkable to me that this does feel like a really universal problem. And I've heard this from, the company that I was at was probably 20 teams. It wasn't a huge company. I've heard this from tiny companies of 5 teams. I've heard this from enormous, sort of massive enterprises that are, multi-billion-dollar companies. And it is really, really strange that we are essentially continuing to make the same mistakes. But also, I think that it is just quite an easy trap to fall into because of this problem where you only do it because you think it will deliver so much value. And so then it's so hard to then sort of pare that back into an MVP land. And I also think that it's about the discipline with which we ship internal product versus external product. Like lots of these are great product orgs that do know all of this stuff, but they just don't see this as a product problem in quite the same way. And so, yeah, I think that's like the one thing, if you're going to take away one thing, it's that this is building a product and you should use all the same muscles and all the same approaches that you would do for any other product. Cool. From Mitchell Way, is Catalog meant to be used in conjunction with tools like Backstage or an internal DB, or can it be an independent replacement for these and be the central hub in an org? I think it depends on what you want Catalog to do. So our Catalog is obviously primarily about incident management. And so if you are primarily using your Catalog to route alerts, pull the right people into incidents, export your postmortems into the right place, all of that kind of stuff, then absolutely you can just use our Catalog and you'll have a great time. That's what we do. So internally, we don't have another Catalog product. There are other things that tools like Backstage and Cortex and Co do that we do not. So that is things like helping out with your audits, helping out with sort of policies and like those kind of things that help you understand like your estate, understand whether you are hitting the bar around, for example, security. And if those features are appealing, if you want that kind of like single pane of glass where you can click and see your links to your pull requests and the links to your Kubernetes cluster and the links to Incident.io, that's where something like Backstage will really shine. I wouldn't default to using a tool. I would wait to find the use case that means you need the tool. But if you have a look at the marketing materials that are for all of those tools, you'll see there's a whole load of stuff. And if there's something in there that feels like it's really meaningful to you guys, then you should absolutely go for it. I think on day one, personally, and obviously this comes with whatever amount of bias that you would like to sort of ascribe to it, I would just start with alert routing. Like that's always the first use case because it will always get kept up to date because people hate getting paged. And it's really, really important that the right people get paged. And that I would always just start in Incident.io. And then once you've got more use cases, you've got more things you want to do, you can then jump out from there. But yeah, my starting point would always be the catalog importer, which I think Eric's been plugging in the chat. So thank you. And getting that data then into Incident.io so that you can use it to route your alerts and to page the right people. And I think as you then build on that, either you end up just sitting inside Incident.io's catalog and that works for you, or you end up buying in another tool or setting up something else. And we've got customers that do both for full transparency. Like there's no reason why it doesn't benefit me if you do or don't have Backstage. Bluntly, it benefits you if you're going to get value from it. The one thing I would never do is don't buy a tool that you don't know why you're buying it, and don't implement something like Backstage. Like it's not easy. So make sure that you're going to get value for money, that you understand the maintenance cost, things like that. Cool. What is the simplest catalog solution in a mid-sized company? I mean, I guess kind of like reframing what I just said, I think it's probably to use a product like Incident.io to have a single like JSONet file that says this is a service and this is the team that owns it, and kind of be done with it. But ultimately, it just depends on what you need it for. But in a mid-sized company, the things I would expect you to really need are you're going to need alert routing. You probably want to know who's in what team and define that in a central place. And maybe you want to have this kind of like products idea or features so that you can translate from a support agent or customer success or somebody who's non-technical telling you there's a problem through to who is the right person I should page. have, I'm not going to try and get it because my computer skills aren't good enough, but I have a diagram where if you imagine that declaring incidents is like a double funnel. So some incidents are going to come from computers saying that they're sad. Those are alerts. They tend to come from a service. So you need to know what team owns that service. And once you get to a team, then you can get to their schedule, their escalation path, and you can page the right person. Other incidents come from a human, and that is your support agents, sales, customer success. I've just seen something that looks a bit weird. And for those, the question that you want to be asking those people is, what is broken? Is it authentication? Is it payments? Is it the dashboard? And then once you've asked that question, you then need to also be able to route to a team. So that means you need a mapping of your product to the teams that own them or features. And essentially that gives you the kind of 3 core bits of the catalog that you need. So that is your services, your teams, and your features. And it's basically that everything leads to teams, because the whole problem you're trying to solve is, who do I want to call because something has gone wrong? So as long as you can kind of get from anywhere to your team, then you're going to be in a really good place. Cool. From Oliver Moore, do you think that you can get too fine-grained about the catalog? There was a blog post a while back that spoke to having infra services features. Yeah, so this is kind of interesting because we often get this where a customer might come to us and say, what should we put in our catalog? And so I'd always start with that spiel about, there are these 3 things that you probably want. But beyond that, again, I would say you want to go use case driven. So if you go around your company looking for data that looks catalog shaped, you will find huge amounts of data, most of which you do not need to put into a catalog. And so, do you need to know what person sits at what desk? Probably not, but like the data's there. And so what you actually want to be doing is sort of thinking about it in terms of, what are the automations that I want to build? What is the workflow that someone wants? And then they want a workflow that says, oh, well, if the service is deployed in this deprecated Kubernetes cluster, I want to post a workflow saying, hey, the cluster's deprecated. You should really consider moving it to this because XYZ. So then I should probably put my Kubernetes clusters into my catalog, map them to my services, and then I can build out the workflow. But crucially, that is a kind of use case first approach. So you want to start with, what is the experience that you want to give either an incident responder or an engineer on your team or your customer support agent, and then kind of back solve it like you would in code. Like, cool, what is the data that I need in order to deliver on that experience? And I would just never put anything in there that you don't think you'll need or that you don't know why you need it. So everything that's there should be there for a reason, and because it clearly benefits you in some way. Cool. I'm now one from Devon. How many? Okay, it's quite a lot. I will start trying to go through these a little bit more quickly. Sorry. From Devon, any suggestions on how to get non-tech information in there, such as detailed descriptions or explanations of what the risks are if the service has problems? So I think that this is, we're sort of like veering into runbook land here. But I think like you can do this, and we have done it. So in a catalog, you can have, a description field, or maybe it's like a link to a document that you've written. I think one of the like challenges here is keeping this information up to date, because again, it comes back to the like, how are you using it? But if you are always posting it into an incident channel and people are relying on that information in order to decide what to do as a result of an incident, then I think that you can get this to a good place. But I think your key challenge is going to be, does it get used often enough so that it remains up to date? And it might be that there are other ways of trying to kind of like build up this institutional knowledge, whether that is through game days or training or run books and things like that. I think the other way that like we do this internally, for example, is a lot of these run books tend to be attached to alerts. So they are an attribute on the alert. And so when you define the alert in Grafana, because in that moment, you are thinking about a thing that might go wrong, that's quite a good moment to be like, and here is what you should do about it, or here is what you should be worried about if this thing goes wrong. And so hooking those 2 things together can also be quite useful. Cool. How do you get buy-in from ops and security teams? They already use lots of tooling to manage people and access. How to shift the point of truth to infra as code for a catalog. This is kind of interesting in that many of the security teams I've spoken to are probably more keen on infrastructure as code than the rest of their org. But I think that in general, whatever tooling security teams and ops teams are using, they probably also support infrastructure as code. The way that you get buy-in probably is that you have to do the work for them. So it's quite difficult to come up with a big stick and say, you must use infrastructure as code, even though maybe the team's not familiar with it. And here's an example YAML, and you'll probably be fine. I think probably the better way would be to engage with them, maybe, embed an engineer with them for a few days to try and work out how their data works and get somebody else who is much more familiar with infra as code to pull their stuff into an existing sort of template and then be able to kind of recreate whatever they're using. But crucially, you never want your catalog to not be being used. So I think this is kind of a premise to the question, but you don't want to end up in a world where you have some catalog data that is reproduced in another tool. And because if the tool is the one that's actually controlling what people can see, they'll update the tool. They won't update your infra as code, and you will once again end up with an out-of-date catalog. Should a specific team be responsible for policing the catalog, or is a shared ownership model more advisable? So ideally, the team should be getting value from the catalog. And so the team should be self-policing and be shared ownership because, for example, if they're getting paged at the wrong time, they will be upset and they will fix it. I think the point at which you start to get into police mode is like the security and audit use cases that we spoke about just at the beginning of the Q&A. I think at that point, you probably do need a specific team who is your security team, whose job it is to be going around and making sure that it's high on people's priority lists. But in general, for your normal catalog stuff with your services and teams, you definitely want a shared ownership model. I think there is a specific team potentially responsible for tooling around the catalog. So that is, making sure that it's all hooked up correctly to Incident.io or to whatever other tools you've got that are using it. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I don't think that you should have a team that's walking around with a stick constantly going, oh, you haven't updated this service. I think you have to believe that you've provided enough value that teams will do it themselves. Otherwise, I don't think it's sustainable. How do you encourage teams to talk about their pain points, especially with customer support teams who desperately need quick access to context, but are working in silos because their team also is not seen as providing immediate value? I think customer support teams is fascinating. I've had very, very similar experiences, Eric. The best thing I've ever seen is that you just sit and shadow them. So you probably have a hunch that there's stuff in support that doesn't feel good. But I think, customer support teams are not used to being high priority for anybody. They're not used to having engineering resource to help. I would highly recommend just sitting and pairing with a support agent and writing huge numbers of notes about all their pain points or any of the operational where their days, look reasonably consistent. And then you can have a conversation where you're like, oh, I saw this. And the support agent will often go, oh, yeah, that's a massive nightmare. I lose like probably 20 minutes a day to that. And then you can start kind of building up your list. Do you think that the service catalog can function effectively as a service graph, or should that be kept separately, for example, in your monitoring tooling? I think the idea of like a service graph or a service dependency graph is quite interesting. Like, I think it's very difficult to keep those things up to date. And generally, until you've, unless you're going to take the chaos engineering route, until you've actually taken something down, it's very hard to know what actually relies on it. I think the best version of this that I've seen is where you're actually using the flow of information or data to derive a service graph. So each service maybe like advertises the services that it calls out to, and that sort of builds out a graph automatically from the code. I think that can work quite well. In terms of like where it should be kept somewhere that it can be used. And the question is like, where do you want to use it? I think I personally have never had an incident where I have needed a service graph to help me out, because normally when the thing is going wrong, it is fairly clear what else is going wrong because you've got alerting and monitoring. I think that there are often places where that's not true, where, for example, a service going down might not bring another service down completely, but it might sort of cause you some like weird issues, or you might need to run some kind of backfill when you bring your service back up. I think those are more about, in my mind, probably runbooks on a specific service of if this service goes down, when you bring it back up, you will need to do all of these steps in order to reconcile or something like that. I think a service graph can be very useful as an onboarding tool and as like a kind of, oh, I need to understand how this fits in and then how we're going to change the architecture. So yeah, I think it depends on how you want to use it and whether it's primarily a visual thing or whether you're actually going to use it to sort of route and make decisions in any of your tooling. All right. If you were building a catalog from scratch, what would you do first? I would do alert routing, and I would do alert routing in Incident.io because obviously Incident.io is amazing, and use that so that you know who to page when something goes wrong. Cool. Do you use GitLab or equivalent to push changes into catalog? Would like to prevent cases where people can push a new service without providing the critical data. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we store all of ours in GitHub. That goes through the catalog importer. You can then run, linting or making certain fields required, and so that people can't commit, because the catalog importer is just pulling off some JSON or some JSONet data, so you can apply some kind of other validator to it if you want to do this. I think this is a really good idea, by the way. I think the kind of carrot and the stick that we were talking about earlier, what you want to do is to provide a carrot, which is like, we're going to deploy your service and give you a load of alerting and monitoring for free and, be able to build consoles and all of that great stuff. And in order to do that, you have to pay a tax of giving us this other information that we need. And that's your kind of pipeline quality gate. So yeah, internally, we don't do that. We're just not big enough to need that right now. But at my previous company, we had something like that. And I think it's a very common setup. How to orchestrate all the different catalog products from Incident, Datadog, Backstage, etc. You want a single source of truth. That will probably be like a GitHub repo, and everything should just drive off that. And you want to make sure that you know where your source of truth is and that there is only one. And so all kind of first-class catalogs like Backstage, Cortex, Ops Level, all of those products will pull off a GitHub repo for you. So GitHub or GitLab or choose your vendor of choice. But if you store all of that data in one place, and then you just get everything to pull from it all of the different bits of data that they need in order to serve your use cases. But it means that the catalog actually becomes a slightly disappointing set of YAML files, which may not feel as exciting, but is probably a much better way of setting yourself up. How does an internal supporting enablement team convince leadership to see them as delivering a product and provide the same product management resources already given to dev teams? Really, really good question. I think probably by pointing at all of the ways in which it's gone wrong in the past and why product would have helped. So I think you kind of end up doing a cost benefit. And then also probably by pointing at, there's some blog posts about this around like internal developer platform teams and stuff like that. But basically like platform teams absolutely need product. That is sort of the direction of travel of the industry as well. And I think probably if you were going to talk to leadership, you could probably poke them to maybe chat to some of their peers at other similar companies, and they'll probably find someone who would also advocate for the same thing, because I do think this is sort of the way the industry is going. You probably need you potentially need a slightly different shaped product manager, but a really, really good product manager for a platform team is just revolutionary, and you'll deliver way more value. But yeah, in terms of very tactically, I would be doing sort of postmortems on some of the previous projects that maybe didn't go so well and trying to outline how that might have gone differently if you had used your internal kind of approach to product. Here, read a lot about examples of product organizations, but not so much examples of agencies. The catalog's very flexible, but you have interesting insights on differences between product and agency organizations. So I think that if you're an agency, the main difference is that your shape of data is different. So particularly if you're an agency that maybe maintains a large number of products for lots of different customers, you probably care about customers just like we do. And you probably care about those products. I think the biggest difference is often that those products tend to be far less connected to each other, although that very much depends on the shape of the agency. But I think that the key thing is to, rather than using any diagram that I put up and deciding that that's what you want, it's all about trying to figure out what are your use cases, what is the information that you need to get the right people in the room, to present them with the right information, and then like back solving for your catalog that way, rather than trying to like fit into a model. Because as you say, you're always going to struggle if you're an agency to fit into a model that's defined by a product organization that will think very differently. Cool. I think we made it to the end of the questions, which I'm really happy about. So I think we're probably going to wrap up here, if that is all right. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Really, really appreciate you taking the time. This will also be available as a recording. So we'll share the recording, and then feel free to send it far and wide. We would love to get loads of people kind of thinking about this stuff, and also feel free to reach out to us, reach out to me on LinkedIn if you've got any other questions. Yeah, that's us for the day. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.